phone, anything that the seller is hooked up to, they need to unpair, remove themselves, go back to factory reset. So when the buyer moves in, they can hook up their phone up to their Ring camera, all those things like that. So just a reminder, and it needs to survive closing, meaning if the seller forgets, they're still obligated to do it. They're still obligated to unpair and delete. Our blue note says any fixture or other item described in paragraphs below and above will not be part of the sale, shall be identified, anything described above should not be part of the sale, should be identified below as applicable. So I got a couple things going on down here. First off, any fixtures that are leased or not owned. Anything leased or not owned by the seller, such as antennas, satellite dishes, receivers, appliances, alarm and security systems, must be identified here and shall not convey. The seller can't sell what's not theirs. So, for example, if the CPI equipment is leased equipment, then they need to return that back to CPI. It's not going to convey, it's not part of the sale. I had a case once where the buyer said, well, we want CPI. Can't they just transfer? So I don't know. Let's have the seller call CPI and see. And they allowed it. So they didn't have to do anything. They just had to transfer the account. So if the buyer wants, something like that, it's worth the phone call to see if we can do that instead of the seller returning the equipment and then the buyer going to get new equipment and setting it back up. So if it is something, it might be worth a phone call. But otherwise, the seller can't convey what's not theirs. Addition to any leased fuel tanks described 7D below shall not convey. We got a whole section on fuel tanks down, so we'll see that. And then we have other items that do not convey. The following items shall not convey. These are the fixtures that the seller is going to take. These are the fixtures that are going to go. So if the seller is going to take their tonal wall mirror, we need to include it in here. If they're going to take their mailbox because they have sentimental attachment, sentimental value to it, then we need to include it here. This is our exclusion to the fixtures. And when the parties agree, then the seller is willing or able to take them. They are allowed to take that fixture. If it's not in here, they can't take it. Not only are they going to take it, but the seller also must repair any damage caused by the removal of these items in a good and workmanlike manner. Seller will notify buyer upon completion of such repairs, provided buyer with documentation thereof, if any. So it's not like they can jerk the ceiling fan out of the ceiling and leave a hole in the ceiling and wires hanging down, right? They got to repair any damage caused to the property by removing these fixtures. So they're not just going to jerk things out of the wall, off the ceiling, and leave the buyer with holes. Blue note says we're advised to consider attaching the additional provisions addendum if the buyer has a specific request on how these repairs should be completed. Again, the additional provisions addendum is one that we will see next week when we look at our forms. There's a lot of good things in the additional provisions addendum. So there's several things for us to discuss. And one of those would be if the buyer has any requests for repairs or the removal of any of these fixtures. Questions on our fixtures? Up next, we got personal property. Following personal property present on the property on the date of the offer shall be transferred to the buyer at closing at no value. And then we have a place to be very specific about what personal property it is that the buyer wants. Hands down, without a doubt, the number one negotiated personal property item is the refrigerator. When you're writing in the refrigerator for your buyer, please don't just put fridge. Be specific about which fridge. What if they have the big, nice fridge in the kitchen that the buyer wants, but then they also have the beer fridge in the garage? If you ask the seller to leave a fridge and they leave the beer fridge, it will not have beer in it, but they will have left that fridge when the buyer wanted the one in the kitchen. I heard when I was coming up, I heard the story about agents writing personal, like fridge in the personal property. For whatever reason, I guess the buyer didn't go to do final walkthrough or whatever, but for whatever reason, once they bought their house and they went into their brand new kitchen, instead of the big nice refrigerator in the kitchen that they thought they were getting, the seller left a little 2-shelf dorm room fridge. Did the seller obey the contract? Did they leave a fridge? What did the contract say? They left a fridge. Did the seller do anything wrong? Unfortunately, no. How do we protect our buyers? Be specific. 2-door stainless steel Whirlpool refrigerator in the property at the time of the showing. If you can get model number, sometimes you can open the doors and you can see like a model number on the inside cover. That would be specific. I'm okay with snapping a picture as a reference so we all are on the same page about which fridge was in the property at the time of showing. I would want something referenced, but please put something in more than fridge. Be specific.
I have 4 refrigerators.
You have 4 refrigerators?
And then one tall freezer. And they're all stainless and big ones.
Grace has all the beer at her house. Let's go to Grace's.
No, it's no beers.
4 fridges and no beers? What? That's crazy. So Grace, if Grace was the seller and the buyer wanted a fridge, wouldn't Grace want to know specifically which one the buyer was wanting? So be specific, you guys. That's hilarious, Grace. Thank you. Be specific so we all know. Probably right after the fridge, the next negotiable item, personal property, is probably going to be the washer dryer. So again, just be specific. Anything is negotiable. Anything is negotiable. I can't tell you how many times I've been showing property and buyers and I walk out to the garage and there's some nice sports car in the, I don't know cars, but there's some nice sports car in the garage. And the buyer says, does the garage come with the house? And I say, or does the car come with the house? And I say, anything is negotiable. If we're not going to negotiate big ticket items like that, we're going to do an outside bill of sale. The lender, this blue note, is telling us that any personal property that would be part of the sale should be identified in this paragraph. Buyer is advised to consult with their lender to assure the personal property item listed above can be included in this contract. We are in the business of selling real estate. The lender is in the business of giving a loan for real estate, not for the car, the dining room furniture, the John Deere green tractor, right? If all those personal items are negotiated, then we need to do an outside bill of sale. The forms committee created an outside bill of sale for us to use that rolled out last year. I don't know the form number off the top of my head, but somewhere in your forms is an outside bill of sale where we can use to negotiate that personal property, how much, how it's going to be paid. All that'll be handled outside of closing. If this personal property list starts growing, I would say outside of the fridge and outside of the washer and dryer, then we need to make sure that the lender's okay with that. Because, I mean, think about it. We're getting a 30-year loan. So basically, we're asking for a 30-year loan to finance the John Deere green tractor, right? The lender's given the loan for the property, not the stuff. So if this list starts growing, just make sure you're using that new form, new to last year form, outside bill of sale. Question comes in the chat about a fully furnished. You can find there's loan products out there. I can't tell you the name right now because I'm trying to think of it, but there's a loan type out there that'll allow you to borrow for the property and the personal property. So if you're going to buy a furnished condo at the beach, then you can get that type of loan that would include both. So that just might be a conversation with the lender. Do you offer a loan product that has for this furnished condo at the beach, for example? Questions on our
Julie,
personal,
when we,
yeah, I'm
no, I was
sorry.
gonna say, when we sold our house, we sold our first house years ago, talking about asking about things that stayed. We had a collie, and the guy asked, did the dog come with that?
No. The gall of some people. I mean, that's like your
I
fur baby.
know. I was like, no.
You might as well ask for the kid too. My goodness.
Does the dog come with us? It's like,
Oh,
no. He will come
they were
with me.
joking. Tell me they were joking. Let's
No,
just pretend they were
I
joking.
thought so too. I was like, surely they're he was dead serious. And I was like, no.
Yeah, that's a quick way to reject an offer real fast. Wow. My goodness. People never cease to amaze me. Just when I think I've heard it all. Wow. Anything else on personal property? I'll tell y'all my personal best as a buyer's agent. I actually got to write in a legally binding contract, personal property, the Adams Family Value pinball machine. And the sellers agreed. They said, man, we apparently moving a pinball machine isn't as easy as one would think. So, like, yeah, we didn't want to mess with it anyway. If they want it, they can have it. My buyers were thrilled. I'm like, yeah, I want the house. Or they were more happy over the pinball machine than they were whatever makes them happy, you know? Where would I put in the contract if it's sold fully furnished? That's a really good question, how that would be handled in the contract, because this is for real property. I don't know the answer to that. I do not know the answer to that. I'm not sure if there's a form to include fully furnished contract. I don't know the answer to that. I feel like, one of the commission's first answers is we got a form for that. So I feel like somewhere in the thousands of forms that there might be a form, but yeah, that would be a good place to start. That might be a call to the legal hotline right there.
Well,
How to make
that
sure.
list that you showed us with all those forms, there was one that said something about a vacation home, and a lot of those are sold,
Furnished.
furnished.
So that
Yeah,
contract would address that. Thank you, Cheryl. If that was a vacation property. So that
yeah,
furnished condo at the beach, if it's a vacation property, but if you're buying it for your personal, I don't know the
right.
answer to that.
I know
That's
that's
that's a good one.
that's a good question though. Yeah.
I'm gonna say legal hotline. I got out of my realm pretty fast. All right, let's start talking about the buyer's due diligence process. Good news is we've talked about the majority of this provision, so we're not going to go through it again because we've already talked about it. I do need to talk a couple things about it now that we're here at the contract. First off, you may want to make a note as we're trying to decipher and dissect this contract. Provisions 4, 5, and 6 are all about the buyer. So buyers agents, when you're having conversation with your buyers about the terms and the contracts that apply to them, 4, 5, and 6 are all about the buyer. 4 is the buyer's due diligence, and it starts with a big red warning. First sentence is in bold, yelling at us. Buyer is strongly encouraged to conduct due diligence during the due diligence period. If buyer is not satisfied with the results or progress of due diligence, buyer should terminate this contract prior to the expiration of the due diligence period unless the buyer can obtain a written extension from the seller. Seller is not obligated to grant an extension. We can always ask for more time, but the seller has every right in the world to say, no, we've already agreed on a due diligence date. Although the buyer may continue to investigate this property following the expiration of the due diligence date, Buyer's failure to deliver termination to the seller prior to the expiration will constitute a waiver by the buyer of any right to terminate based on the matter relating to the due diligence. Provided, however, that the due diligence period, buyer may still exercise the right to terminate if seller fails to materially comply with any of their obligations under their contracts or for any other reason permitted under the terms of this contract or North Carolina law. There are a few times that the seller may have to refund the due diligence. And we're going to see that as we continue going in our contract. We'll see when the seller may have to refund or is obligated to refund that due diligence. The buyer continues to investigate the property after due diligence period. When we're done with due diligence, the buyer hasn't lost the right to learn about the property. The buyer has lost the right to terminate. So even though we're after due diligence, we could still be learning about the property. We're going to talk about the final walkthrough in a minute. If there's any repairs. All they've lost at the end of the due diligence period is the right to terminate. Yes.
If they decide to extend it, do they also have to pay an additional monies for due diligence?
It's negotiable. It's
Okay.
negotiable. So they could ask for an extension and not offer money. I think, Tink, a better way to make a seller give you more time is to offer them more money. But you don't have to. And the seller that may be part of the negotiations. The buyer may say, I want 2 more weeks. And the seller may say, well, I want $200 more. And now we're back in the throes of negotiations. It's not a have to, but it is usually a negotiable. I think a savvy seller, a savvy listing agent is going to request more money, right? For your seller. If we're going to give you more time versus money, right? So if you want more time.
How would you write that up?
My amendment, I have an agreement to amend the contract, and it addresses pretty much all the blanks that you and I fill in. The agreement to amend allows us to change. So due diligence, earnest money, dates, all that good stuff. And we'll see that next week. Then we get into some things that the buyer should consider doing during their due diligence. Again, we've talked about all this last night. The loan, talking about the loan, I do want to point this blue note out. There is no loan or appraisal contingency in this offer to purchase and contract. Therefore, buyers advised to consult with the buyer's lender prior to signing this offer to assure that the due diligence period allows sufficient time for the loan process and for buyer's lender to provide buyer sufficient information to decide whether to proceed with or terminate this transaction. There is no loan contingency. If the parties want it, first off, who can remind me what a contingency is? Let's back up for a second. What did we say a contingency was?
Dependent upon something else?
That's right. It's dependent on something else. I love to watch you guys explain it to me while you're on mute. So dependent on something else. So in this case, the loan contingency, what the buyer's saying, a loan contingency would say, I'm not obligated. I don't have to buy your home if I don't get loan approval. The contingency is the loan approval. And if that loan approval doesn't happen, then the buyer's not legally obligated to buy. That's what the contingency means. Back to our contract. There is no loan contingency. If the buyer doesn't get loan approval, they'll have to terminate. Within due diligence, they'll get their earnest money back. After due diligence, now they're in breach and they'll lose their earnest money. Can the parties agree to add a contingency? Can they agree to add a loan contingency? Sure. It's negotiable. If the parties agree to do that, now we have a loan contingency. I don't have a form for that. Wow, remember we just said there's a form for that? Except this, there's not a form for everything. There's not a form for a loan contingency. So if the parties are going to agree to add a loan contingency, We need to get the attorney, the closing attorney, to draft something up for us. There are no built-in loan contingencies. Talk to somebody that bought a house 30 years ago. You know what was in the contract 30 years ago? Loan contingencies. Not anymore. They're not there. Property investigation, things that the buyer, at the buyer's expense, shall be entitled to conduct all desired tests, surveys, appraisals, investigations, examinations, etc., including but not limiting to, and here's all the things that we talked about last night. I'll let you guys look this over. You can review. We talked about it in chapter 14. But I'm not going to do it twice. So I think it's kind of worth looking over, reviewing just for your own practice again. But it spells out the things that the buyer should consider investigating at their expense as part of their due diligence. What I say to you guys is, remember, this list isn't inclusive. So if there's something your buyer wants investigated that's not on this list, we're still going to help them check it out. We're still going to help. Never look at a buyer and say, oh, you don't have to worry about that. That'll be fine. You're not the one buying this house. If they want it investigated, we say, okie doke, let's do it. Sale or
Julie?
yeah,
So let me get this straight. So there's no loan or appraisal contingency that is automatic on an offer. Is that what you're saying?
it's got to be added.
Wow. Okay.
Yep, yep. It's got to be added if the parties agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you know why they took it off?
No. But
How does that work if it doesn't appraise then? I don't understand how it's kind of a best guess until the appraiser comes out.
right, so if the property doesn't appraise, the lender's only going to issue the loan on the sales price or the appraised amount, whichever's less. So if the property doesn't appraise, honestly, as a buyer's agent, the
Yeah.
first thing I'm going to do is ask the seller to come down on the sales price. I'm
Wait,
going to go in for round twos and negotiations.
Wait, but you said there's no appraisal contingency though, right?
Right, what did I just say there was? But if the property doesn't appraise,
Yeah.
if the property doesn't appraise, I'm going to ask the seller to reduce the purchase price first. They don't have to, but I can ask, right? If the
Yeah.
seller's unwilling to reduce the purchase price, then the buyer's going to have to come up with the difference. They're going to have that cash difference. And they're not going to be able to get a loan for the difference because they're already trying to get a loan to buy a house. So they better have, cash stuffed in a mattress or have mom and
So-
dad gift it or something. But bottom line, Tim, if it doesn't appraise and
Yeah.
we can't work it out,
Yeah.
we got to terminate.
So then does the buyer lose out on the due diligence?
Yeah,
Wow.
Yep.
But the buyer
that's
could
part of their
probably
investigation.
but the buyer could probably get back the earnest money deposit then.
If
Just
we
not,
terminate within due diligence, they'll get their earnest money back. So we want to make sure
If-
we get that appraisal back while we are still in due diligence.
yeah.
But
Okay.
if can they write it in? Can that be part of their agreement?
We could agree to add an appraisal
I mean,
contingency.
if both parties agree, it could be.
Yeah, we can agree to do it, but
Okay,
it's not built in, it's not automatic.
right, okay.
And guys, remember, we're hopefully as buyer's agents, we're pulling good comps before we even write the offer. So we're letting the buyer know, this is what I think it's going to sell for. This is what you're going to offer. So, I'm not an appraiser, but my comps, if I'm doing my comps accurately, I should be able to get close to it. Same thing with the listing. I'm not an appraiser, so I can't give you a guarantee that's what it'll appraise for. But when the buyer wants to offer, more than asking price, we need to make sure that they have the ability to close that gap between the appraised amount and the sales price. And our comps can really help with that if we're doing them well. It's risky. It is very, very risky. And yeah, that appraisal is part of that property investigation. So we want to make sure we're in communication with the lender. Ask the lender, how much time, how much due diligence do you need? How much time do you need to get your appraiser out, get their report back so we can see where we are while we're still in due diligence? Like we said, I hate to terminate, but if I have to, the best I can do as a buyer's agent is terminate while we're in due diligence so I can get my buyer their earnest money back. But hopefully those comps will let us know about where we are.
Would the contingency only be during the due diligence? Can
I
it
believe it
extend
would be
past
for the
that?
entire,
Since it's a separate agreement, can it extend past that period?
it could, if the parties agree, you know, but it at least gonna be until we got that appraisal back. We can't do anything else until we get that appraisal back. But yeah, we could make that, you know, make it through the whole contract or for 2 weeks or, you know, whatever. I don't have a form for it. So to my understanding, the attorney can pretty much put in there whatever we tell him to, as long as it's, you know, legal, as long as it's okay per the NC Bar Association. And this is what, I mean, anybody try to buy a house 2021, 2022? If you do, my hat's off to you. Ezra did. Bless your heart, and you're still here. You know, it was insane for buyers a couple years ago, and you were competing with buyers offering. I mean, y'all, I saw $75,000 more than asking price. That thing's not going to appraise. So the buyers had to know going into it that they were going to have to come up with that.
How long does a normal appraisal take? Like from the time they get there till they leave? Is it just hours or days?
The appraiser, I mean, for them to go out and do their thing, is that what you're? The appraiser's really in and out of the house in no time. Most of the appraiser's work is done on the computer. So they're pulling comps, they're studying the neighborhood, the market, the area. They're going to flit in and out, you know, real quick just to see the inside. They drive around the neighborhood, but for the most part, their work's done on the computer. Anything else on that? There's risks involved for sure. For sure. Especially a couple years ago. We're still in a seller's market. We're not in as strong as a seller's market. But y'all don't worry. One day that pendulum will swing back and the buyers will be in the driver's seat and they'll be able to look at the sellers and go, haha, we're in control now. So, you know, they'll get theirs. It'll come back. And then after the buyer's market, we'll go back into seller's market. It's like a big boxing match or something, right? We just keep going back and forth.
Can a real estate agent become an appraiser?
Sure. I think a good rule of thumb, Cheryl, is to wear one hat per transaction. So you decide going into it. Am I going to be the appraiser? Am I going to be the broker? I doubt the lender would let you appraise a property that you were brokeraging, you know? I've thought about it. You want to go get our appraisal license, Cheryl? You want to go get it? You want to? I've thought about it. I don't know. That might be my next. Y'all don't tell Lane, but that might be my next. We'll see.
What about investor? Is being a broker advantageous or disadvantage?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I been real estate investor for myself for last 40 years. And I do own commercial properties, you know, like that. But is that something
What, to broker
advantageous
your
for
own
me or
deals?
not? No, being
Yeah,
a
I mean, I
broker.
guess that if you want to play investor and be your own broker, you know, represent yourself in the transaction, I think that's okay. I think the two hat thing is more when you're working with others. You know, but
Okay.
if you're comfortable wearing two hats for your own transaction, your own personal, then by all means. But when you're working with others, I think we pick one hat per transaction. I know I got several home inspectors out there that are also general contractors. And they'll say, I'll either inspect the home or I'll do the repairs, the agreed upon repairs, but they're not going to do both, right? So they got to decide which one they want to do. Because think about it, you got the home inspector coming in listing a whole bunch of problems, and then we negotiate the repairs for them to fix. The seller at some point may stop and think that through, right? Does that kind of seem a little unfair to the seller? So I think when you're working with or for others, pick a hat, and that's the hat you wear this transaction.
That's clear. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Let's see. I want to share one more thing with you guys real quick, but let's see if we can't get through just a few more. Sale or lease of existing property, as noted in paragraph 5B below, which we'll see, unless otherwise provided, this contract is not conditioned upon the sale or lease or closing of a property owned by the buyer. Therefore, if buyer must sell or lease other real property in order to qualify for a new loan or to otherwise complete the purchase, buyer should seek to close on buyer's other property prior to the end of due diligence, or be reasonably satisfied that the closing on buyer's other property shall take place prior to settlement of this date. So again, remember, we're talking about the buyer's due diligence process in this section. And if they have another property to lease or sell before I can buy yours, this is also not a built-in contingency. The parties could agree to do it, but otherwise, the buyer's encouraged to make sure that it sells or leases while we're still in due diligence, or at least be reasonably sure, because if it doesn't sell or lease and they have to terminate and we're after due diligence, they're going to lose their earnest money. So this is part of their due diligence, part of them learning about it. Repair, improvement, negotiations. Buyer acknowledges and understands the following. Unless the party agrees otherwise, here it is. This property is being sold in its current condition. Does the seller have to fix or repair anything? The contract says the property is being sold in its current condition. If the seller agrees to do any repairs, we have a form. We'll look at that next week. And in a sense, we're amending that one sentence. Now the property is being sold in the condition, except that the seller is going to do the electrical, for example. Once they agree to do those repairs, that's amended that sentence, and they're now obligated. I guess I should say if they agree to do those repairs. Sellers advised to make any repairs requests. I'm sorry, buyers advised to make any repair requests in sufficient time to allow for negotiations to be concluded prior to the expiration of the due diligence period. Any agreement that the parties may reach with respect to repairs in addition to this contract must be in writing and signed in accordance to a future paragraph. So again, what we've been saying, all repairs need to be negotiated and agreed upon while we're still in due diligence. If the seller is going to do anything, I need that in writing. The repairs themselves don't have to be done until prior to settlement. And then the notes just referring us to paragraphs 8. These are seller's paragraphs. So we'll see those about negotiated repairs. I'm going to, we got a little bit more to say here, but we won't get to it tonight. That's fine. So we'll start here Tuesday night. We'll get through the rest of this. We'll start looking at some other forms, chapter 11, etc. Wednesday, we'll do that closing disclosure. We'll talk more about next week, but just kind of give you a heads up. Finishing up chapter 11 next week and then getting ready for the exam. So we'll start here. I do want to, because I've talked a lot about the force changes, and I know many of you are not affiliated. So I did want to share, and I'm going to plot this in the chat in just a second. But the Forms Committee, NC Realtors, provides us with a summary of the changes. And you can see here specifically what changes were made to 2T, 2G, etc. Kind of the really cool thing that I like about the summary, if you click on the blue hyperlink, it'll take you to not just the offer to purchase and contract, but the markup. They will highlight what they struck through, what they changed, what they edited. So again, if you're not with a firm, if you're with a firm, you've probably gone over the forms changes, or you will, it's coming. But this just kind of shows us what those changes were. And like I said, I'm a pretty big fan of that summary. So let me stop sharing. And then let me throw that in the chat for you. So if you want to grab it, you're welcome to peruse it and kind of see what's changed. As you can imagine, most of the changes this year had things to do with that. Where is it? There it is. With that NAR settlement. So the summary actually addresses what of our forms had to be changed as a result of the settlement. And I'll be honest, y'all, North Carolina was in really good position because we didn't have to change much. We were lucky. I think we were pretty much doing it right, let's just say, to begin with. And we were very, very lucky. But I got it in the chat. You guys, did it pop up? Okay. So if you want to grab it, it's there. It's not required for this class. You don't have to. But like I said, I know some of you aren't affiliated. So you may want to know what's different, kind of start looking at what's there when you do become affiliated. If you don't want to grab it, don't touch it. It's not required. What questions do I have? Comments? Concerns? Y'all ready to go hit that beer fridge? I'm just saying. All right. You guys have a good weekend. Look over the 302 stuff. Reach out to me if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help. Enjoy your weekend. Have fun. If you're active and affiliated, go sell a house so you can tell us all about it on Tuesday. Y'all have a good weekend, and we'll see you guys
Thank
next
you
week.
so much.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night. Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
Julie, can I
Yeah.
ask you one question?
Of course.